Welcome back to Sisterhood. I'm Tina Hilson, and I have joining me again today Jen Roy and Megan Whiteside. And glad you are here.
We are so glad to be
from
here
Calvert.
again.
Yes. So, Jen, you get to share with us your story about your identity crisis moment. And although, like we said last time, we all go through moments of identity crisis.
crises.
And so, could you just share with us a little bit about your story
Absolutely.
and also who you kind of relate with in the Bible?
Yeah. So, for me, the biggest identity crisis I've had to date is when I found out I was pregnant, which is like really exciting, and I was really stumped. I got pregnant before Mark and I were married, and so growing up in the church and having the background that I had and having friends who looked to me as the person that went to church out of everyone, I just felt it weighed really heavy. I wasn't able to like celebrate the way I wanted to when you take a positive pregnancy test. And so I was feeling really unqualified to even, not only to be a Christian, but to step into the church. I'm like, well, how am I gonna look? And at the time I had a girlfriend in college who went through the exact same thing, but like a year prior to me. And I just was like, I gotta reach out to her and see how she handled this because I don't know where to go. And she spoke these words to me that I will never forget. And she said, he's entrusted you with one of his children. And that gave me so much peace in the moment. So my feeling of being unqualified was kind of like hushed to an extent. And I was able to enjoy what I was going through. And then it was almost 2 years later that I actually came out of that identity crisis completely. When God re-spoke those words so prophetically in my life, it was actually, ironically enough, I know Pastor Mike just did a series on Nehemiah. He was preaching on Nehemiah in March of 2017. And he said, all the opinions you have don't matter, but the one you're called to will change the world. And I broke down, like her words of you've been entrusted with one of his children just flooded back over me. My heart had been breaking for God's daughters. And so I didn't know what else to do but to surrender because we're all unqualified. And it just kind of hit me then, like, if we weren't unqualified, what good is the blood of Jesus Christ? Right. And so I was able to take that and just lift up my hands and say, okay, here I am. What are we going to do? And so from there, it was able to just kind of grow only the way God could make it grow. And I was able to step into who he's called me to be. And so for me, it started with like a simple yes. I know our stories intertwine there really well. So when I heard that, I'm like, okay, at the time, Pastor Curtis was leading the young adults ministry here at the La Plata campus, and I have known him for a while, and I'm like, I'm going to start showing up to that. Like, I'm going to get plugged back in. I've got to do something. And then God put it on my heart to lead a small group, which I had never done. And I said, okay, so it's another yes.
Well, and the funny
and
thing.
Then we met.
Yeah, we met. Well, and I, at the time, was working in the area, and I was looking for a church, and I had stumbled into a service on Saturday night, and it happened to be the weekend of the small group fair where everybody had their tables and was doing their small groups, and I was just kind of walking around with my eyes, like, looking at my feet, you know, just... like, I don't know what I'm doing here. Like, I don't know anyone here. I don't belong here. And I just walked up to Jen's table, and she was kind. And the book, it was Francis Chan's Crazy Love. And I was like, that looks cool. Like, I'll read it. And I started talking to her. And I don't even know if she knew this at the time, but not only was I, like, iffy about coming back to church, but I was also living in Prince Frederick, driving to Waldorf for work, and then driving to her house in Hollywood for small group.
Yeah, I know.
And then, but that's
you
how
said
much,
yes too.
But that's how much people want community, and that's how much your yes matters.
Well, and I think about, like, in relation to a woman in the Bible with Rahab, like, how unqualified, like, she is known by her sin, Rahab the Prostitute.
Yeah.
But she said yes, and God delivered Israel. And she, like, it's amazing what he can do with one simple yes, and how it can snowball. I can't imagine her feeling with them coming to the door. Like, she could have been like, well, my neighbor keeps a clean house. My neighbor doesn't have this going on. 100 different excuses for why she wouldn't be qualified to do something she's called to do for God. And then she takes it a step further, and she lets them in, and she hides them, and she helps them escape. And her yeses just continue, and it puts her in the lineage of Jesus Christ.
Right.
Yeah. Like, okay, so this is completely me just thinking, but the rope that they go down, that the spies,
the scarlet rope.
I'm like, okay, that's not the first time she's had to use that rope. So in my opinion, like, God was able to use something from her past, like a sinful thing from her past, in the story of deliverance, just because she said yes.
Right.
Like, it's such a beautiful story to me.
Well, I think about myself too. Like, I shared this in last week's episode, but I'm in ministry. That's my job now, and I never thought that I would be in ministry. And part of the reason that I'm in ministry is because Jen said yes to starting a small group, and I stayed at New Life because of that small group. And through relationships that I found at New Life, I heard God's call into ministry. Yeah. And if Jen hadn't said yes, then God still he would have done what he does, because that's who he is. Yes. And he doesn't have to have us to get his job done. But what a blessing to be able to be used if we do say yes.
And just think of the difference, her hiding the spies and them, and she protecting them, and they said, well, we will protect you because of what she did for them, and how because of those actions, she was part of...
Her whole family was saved.
Right.
She got taken into the nation of Israel, God's chosen people.
Right.
And then being, like we said, in the lineage of Jesus Christ.
Right.
Like,
and the difference she made, and because of that, she made the difference. And how much more when we, like you say that yes, can we make a difference in the lives of other people?
Absolutely.
And you were talking about how you just didn't feel worthy.
Yeah.
And how you feel not qualified.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is that was one example of feeling unqualified. But I feel like the devil consistently tries to catch us up in the same thing, and he will if we're not careful. So even being on the Sisterhood lead team, look at who I lead with. I lead with you and Karina, who are pastors' wives, Jen and Aaron, who are entrepreneurs but have their hands in ministry. I'm a dental hygienist. It's like, I don't know if angels are going to need their teeth cleaned, but I'm like, what am I offering here? And I know we had an event, and I forget which event it was, but I remember holding hands with you and another lady, and I felt unqualified. And I spoke that out, and it was, I think we have to consistently let God re-humble us and show us who he is, because it's through our disqualifications that he's able to shine, and we're able to give him glory. It's just so beautiful, and I can't imagine how many times Rahab must have felt that way. How many times did she say, well, I'm a prostitute, or was a prostitute. How did I get included into the nation of Israel when there's other people that perished who didn't live? Like, the devil's constantly going to try to remind us of our shortcomings and our disqualifications if we let him.
Yeah, and it doesn't even have to be a sin.
Right.
It could just be just insecurities that we have.
Absolutely.
Because I know what you just said, but I fight that all the time in my own, even just being up here and trying to host, it's a big step for me to even, because I don't, I'm like, I'm not as good as so-and-so and so-and-so.
And that's the realness of it all.
Yeah, we talked about comparison.
I remember getting the call to be the worship leader at Calvert, and I told them on the phone, you must have lost your mind. I think you called the wrong person.
Right.
Like, do you remember who you're talking to?
But how comforting to know that, we're 3 out of 3 here, have all felt disqualified at some point, and it's addressed in the Bible, and it shows us that God's going to use that, time and time again.
And not just Rahab, but think about everybody. So many people in the Bible, probably everyone, have done something. There's no perfect person in the Bible except Jesus. Yeah. And you can go and read and find that, well, that person did this. Yeah. Why did God use them? And God uses our shortcomings for his glory.
Yeah. Which is one of my favorite moments in the Bible is when God is asking Moses to go free his people. And Moses is like, but I've never been able to speak before. I've never been able, I don't know how to say things. And he's like, who gave human beings their mouths?
Right.
Like,
Right.
who put you here
Yes.
and put you in this situation? Like, I've got this. Like, you don't have to do anything but say yes.
Yeah. Well, and one of my favorite verses is in Isaiah 66, and forgive me, I'm going to quote the Message version because it's so pretty.
Yes.
But he says, I'm looking for someone plain and simple, but reverently responsive to what I say. And like, if that's not all of us, then who is it? You know, like we're all just plain and simple. So just be able to be reverently responsive, like what an honor that is. And Rahab got to experience the blessing of that. Yeah. And that's what I want. Like, I want to see God move on a regular basis. And if I don't say yes, how will he? Yeah. So I feel like I really relate to Rahab in that.
Yeah, and I feel like when we find ourselves feeling, I don't know, some people, I think it's harder for God to work through pride
Absolutely.
than humility.
Absolutely.
But Satan will try to push us down and beat us up for our insecurities or our unqualifiedness, if you will. Yeah. And God is just like, no, I qualify you.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, and even for like the prideful, Satan's going to cause you to struggle too. You know, so he's going to constantly do the same thing. He's just going to wrap it differently. Yeah. And we're all going to have to try to identify that so that we can surrender it over and over and over again. It's never going to be a one-time process. Yeah. And that's another thing about Rahab's story, that she just was able to say yes over and over and over again. And I think that's such a big bring home for girls in this day and age, because we are so bombarded with who the world tells us to be, what we should be thinking, where should we stand on issues, what makes a woman, do you stay home, do you go to, like, the list doesn't end. When God says you're chosen, you're set apart. If we just rest in being a daughter of the King and our true identity, then he can just fully move.
And how much more can God work through us and in us when we are surrendered?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And say yes.
So. Yeah. And we don't have to know the whole plan. No. That's the beauty of it. Like, we don't have to know this grand 10, 15 year, like even 5-year plan. We just have to know, forgive me, I'm about to quote Frozen 2 because that's Frozen 2, but the next thing, the next right thing. Well, and my kid keeps singing that all over the house, and I'm like,
I love that though.
It's just such a cool reminder. Well, it's just one of the songs,
lucky,
but they talk about it, and I think it just echoes so well with what Jesus asks of us. Is just
do the next right thing.
The next thing that I'm asking you to do. Don't worry about the rest. Don't stress out about what it looks like. Absolutely. Don't stress out about what you're going to have to learn or how you're going to have to evolve or whatever. Like, I'll put you in the right place to learn the things that you need to learn to be what I'm asking you to be. Like,
well, and if we sing like he leaves the 99, then we have to believe that. You have to own that, and you have to say, okay, he's got this. Like, no matter what my past is, no matter what this person says or that person says, I can rest on his promise, because that's the most sure foundation that you could ever have.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I think sometimes what makes it hard is not only our insecurities, but our desire. I mean, I'm sure men have this issue too, but our desire to control the situation, the outcomes, and some of that can be the unknown. Like, I mean, and we want to control the unknown.
You're not okay with not knowing.
I
We're still speaking in Frozen 2.
Right.
Oh, sorry.
That's happening.
I haven't even seen it yet.
You're still quoting it.
Oh, sorry.
No, but it's so true, and Rahab's a great example of that, because when the spy said, "Mark your door, and we will spare you," she didn't know. She had to take them for their word. The men that God had sent, like, she had to believe them and believe that God would follow through with that, and just hang up the rope and hope for the best.
Right.
And look how it played out for her. It's incredible to watch him move with a surrendered heart. It really is.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. I think we all need to remember that God can use us no matter how we feel.
Absolutely.
And just like you said, just remember to say yes when you feel insecure,
It's a
or
daily decision.
unqualified. And I just love how your stories connect because you said yes.
I mean, I just think about it all the time. Your willingness to say yes changed the entire trajectory of my life.
Well, and what her story, I mean, what is her daughter going to grow up to?
Right, and that's what I was saying. I think about the people that you'll be able to influence that I'll never know.
Right.
And how beautiful is that?
And if we could all remember that when we are surrendered to God, that it could change someone else's life and be someone else's salvation story.
And the cool thing is, when we get to heaven, we'll get to see that. Yeah. We'll get to see
the tapestry that is wove.
How it was woven together. And I just cry every time there was an old song. I can't even remember the song now. But yes.
For giving to the Lord.
I'm about to start crying thinking about the song. But just thinking about how we'll get to see the little yeses that we weren't sure about. We don't get to see, I don't get to see how leading worship on Sunday morning impacts people's hearts. I don't get to see what they do when they go home. I don't get, every once in a while they'll share testimonies with us, but I'm just operating in faith, knowing that God is asking me to do this, and I'm going to do it with all my heart to the best of my ability, and I'm going to let him do the rest. And then one day in heaven, I'll get to see how he used me, and that's just...
mind-blowing. Absolutely.
Well, just remember that when you feel unqualified, that God can use the unqualified. He's used so many people in the Bible who feels unqualified. And when you surrender to the Holy Spirit and say yes to him, he can use you in some incredible ways. So God can use you to change someone else's life and make an impact in their story. So thank you for joining us, and hope you have a great day.
You always love, always